She trusted him with her life. He was the man she thought would protect her, guide her, keep her safe. But one night in 1989, that trust became her downfall. An FBI agent, a clandestine affair, and a life she never saw coming. Susandanielsmith was married to the Bureau. She believed in justice, until it was her own life that slipped away. They called it the first murder by an FBI agent, the first betrayal from within. Tonight, we uncover how a woman of conviction became collateral damage in a web of secrets, power, and fatal obsession. This is not just a crime story. It's a scandal, a warning, a tragedy. Born in 1961 in Matewan, West Virginia, Susan Daniels was the fifth of 9 children. Raised in Freeburn, Kentucky, she dropped out of school early, married at just 15, and by 19 had 2 children. She and her husband Kenneth, a local drug dealer, split up, but they continued to live together for the sake of their kids. Then in 1987, FBI agent Mark Putnam arrived in Pikeville, Kentucky, fresh from the academy and hungry to prove himself. He was tracking Carl Cat Eyes Lockhart, a notorious bank robber, a case that needed local assistance. A sheriff's deputy introduced Susan as a potential informant. She agreed, first for money, then out of something deeper. Her tip led federal agents right to Lockhart, and in December 1987, he was sentenced to 57 years. Susan reportedly received $5,000 for her help. Soon, phone calls started trickling in, always initiated by her. Putnam, ambitious and lonely, began to lean on her, to talk, to unwind, to trust. By mid-1988, that professional bond had crossed the line. The affair began. She says it was emotional, passionate. He later claimed it was brief, even unintentional. In early 1989, Putnam requested a transfer to Miami. He wanted space. Susan missed him. Still, they stayed in touch. Then, once Putnam returned to wrap up another case, Susan dropped a bombshell. She told him she was pregnant, his child, and she intended to prove it. He panicked, offered adoption, offered abortion, offered help, anything to keep it hidden. Susan refused. He begged her to remain silent. That confession changed everything. What began as a partnership of necessity became tangled with raw emotion, fear, and fatal betrayal. On June 8, 1989, what began as routine surveillance turned into a nightmare. Susan called Putnam one last time, asking him to pick her up in Pikeville. He agreed, claiming they needed closure. Instead, he drove her to a remote coal-tinged ravine on Peter Creek Mountain. There, he strangled her during an argument about her alleged pregnancy. Afterward, he hid her body in the trunk of his rental car, cleaned up the scene, and resumed work the next day as if nothing happened. Sheriff's deputies began a missing person investigation when Susan's sister, Shelby, reported her gone on June 16th. But the FBI knew more than they disclosed. Putnam was already a key suspect. Detectives interviewed her ex-husband, Kenneth, and even Cat Eyes Lockhart. Yet all eyes silently lingered on the FBI agent. Putnam agreed to a polygraph in Lexington. He failed, his calm veneer cracking. 3 days later, he confessed to both the killing and the location of Susan's remains. Almost a year later, in 1990, Susan's remains were found in that same ravine, finally closing the loop on her disappearance. When Mark Putnam confessed, it wasn't to a small-town officer or a partner on the case. It was directly to his FBI supervisors. He walked into the field office in Lexington, Kentucky, calm, measured, and admitted to strangling his informant, Susandanielsmith. The Bureau was stunned. One of their own, a rising star with a clean record, had just confessed to murder. In exchange for a full confession, federal prosecutors offered Putnam a plea deal: voluntary manslaughter, not murder. Why? Because his confession was the only thing they had. The physical evidence had degraded. The body had been left in the Kentucky wilderness for over a year. The plea deal outraged Susan's family, especially her sister Shelby, who had spent months plastering missing posters, knocking on doors, demanding the truth. In court, Putnam didn't deny a single detail. No elaborate defense, no claim of self-defense or mental instability. He simply said, "I lost control. I killed her." Judge Eddie C. Lovelace sentenced him to 16 years in prison. It was the first time in US history that a federal FBI agent had been convicted of homicide. In Susan's hometown of Matewan, West Virginia, the air felt heavy with unresolved pain. Her family didn't get a trial. No public cross-examination, just a sentence and silence. Meanwhile, the FBI quietly tried to distance themselves. No press conferences, no apology, just a single short statement. This was a tragic anomaly. But to the people who knew Susan, to the children she left behind, it wasn't an anomaly. It was betrayal. Mark Putnam entered prison in 1990, not as an ordinary inmate, but as a disgraced federal agent. He served his sentence at a low-security federal correctional facility in Yazoo City, Mississippi. The same precision that once made him a promising agent now fueled his quiet routine behind bars. There were no public outbursts, no interviews, no written apologies, just silence. For 10 years, he kept to himself, avoided altercations, and earned what the Bureau once called clean conduct. In 2000, after just 10 years served on a 16-year sentence, Mark Putnam was quietly granted parole. There were no headlines, no cameras, just a man walking free from federal custody and disappearing from public view. He moved to Georgia, changed his name, and remarried. He built a new life in near-total obscurity, but Susan's family, they never escaped the aftermath. Her children, then just toddlers, grew up without their mother. Her sister Shelby became the family spokesperson, pushing for justice, for visibility, for recognition that Susan wasn't just a troubled informant, but a woman manipulated by power. Small towns don't forget, and Matewan, West Virginia, certainly didn't. Locals still talk about the day the FBI rolled in, the whispers in church pews, the eyes that shifted when Susan's name was brought up. To some, she was a woman who got involved with the wrong man. To others, she was a victim of power imbalance, a mother trapped between survival and betrayal. In 2002, the story resurfaced when authors and journalists began digging into the case. True crime books and documentaries followed. But for a decade, the real story had been kept quiet. Putnam never appeared in interviews. He didn't return calls. His silence spoke louder than any statement could. In the years that followed Mark Putnam's release, the silence surrounding Susandanielsmith's death began to fracture, not because of official statements or legal breakthroughs, but because of relentless curiosity from the outside world. In 2003, crime journalist Aphrodite Jones published a gripping account titled "The FBI Killer," offering a deeper dive into the case. For the first time, the public saw a version of events that focused not on a federal agent's fall from grace, but on a young mother who vanished without justice. Documentaries soon followed. Network programs like CBS's 48 Hours and Oxygen's Snapped gave voice to Susan's family. They showed photos the FBI had never released, images of a smiling woman holding her daughter, standing at the edge of a quiet creek, laughing in the kitchen. They weren't just images. They were proof that Susandanielsmith had been more than her mistakes. But for every documentary that aired, more questions emerged. Why had it taken a full year for anyone to discover Susan's body, buried in a shallow grave? Why wasn't there internal accountability inside the FBI? And perhaps most haunting of all, why had a woman in fear of her life trusted the very man who ended it? The Bureau kept quiet. Public statements were rare, usually sterile. They called it a tragic incident, but local communities, women's rights groups, and true crime authors called it something else. Power unchecked. Susan's daughter, now grown, never granted interviews. Her silence, some say, was louder than any confession Mark Putnam ever made. As more people learned about the story, online forums erupted with theories, debates, and outrage. Not because of what Susan did, but because of what she endured. She had been recruited by the government, trained, paid, and promised protection. And when the lines blurred between duty and desire, she was abandoned. In life, Susan was labelled troubled. In death, she became a symbol, not of scandal, but of a system that, just once, should have done better. At the heart of it all, Susandanielsmith was not a headline. She was not just a statistic or a subplot in a federal investigation. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother of two. She believed in love, believed in protection, believed, maybe naively, that if she stayed loyal, someone would fight for her the same way she fought for them. But no one did. Her name appears nowhere on plaques or policy changes. There is no Susan Smith reform bill, no FBI apology, no admission that a federal badge does not always come with a moral compass. Instead, her story was left to fade in backrooms, whispered only in true crime corners and late-night replays of justice gone wrong. And Mark Putnam? He served 10 years, not for the cover-up, not for betrayal, but for manslaughter, and nothing more. He walked free in 2000, rebuilt his life, got remarried, started over. But Susan never got that chance. She was buried not just in a shallow grave, but beneath layers of silence, judgment, and institutional failure. And yet, here you are, listening, watching, asking questions that still need answers, that matters, because what happened to Susan is not just a story from the 1980s, it's a warning. A cautionary reminder that no matter how powerful a man may be, no matter how polished his badge or how practiced his charm, when the system forgets the people it was meant to protect, lives are lost. We tell these stories not to glorify pain, but to learn from it, to remember that justice doesn't always arrive in time, but truth can still echo long after silence, and Susan's truth, it still matters. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made you reflect, question, or even grieve, then share it. Let her name reach those who still believe that loyalty should never cost you your life. This was the story of Susandanielsmith, and here at Beyond Her Rage, we tell the stories they tried to erase.